Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Mike Dunn, tabletop editor-in-chief at GameTrend.com. Mike has recently kicked off a movement in the industry toward a standardized code of ethics for media across the board gaming industry. Mike, welcome to the binge. How you doing?
I'm doing good, James. How are you doing?
Oh, I am doing great. This topic has got me really excited. We got a chance to talk recently at Origins where we were able to connect. As soon as I saw your card, I'm like, dude, we got to get you on this podcast stat. This has got to be just, I think, the most timely time to go through an interview like this. Before we get into the code of ethics, and we're going to go dive real deep on that in a second, I really want people to get a chance to kind of understand your background, kind of where you're coming from, because I think it informs why you're kind of coming at this from the angle that you're coming at. So when we start off with, how are you involved in the board game industry to begin with?
Yeah, well, I mean, besides having played board games since I was a wee lad, I've also been a part of a site for the last 20 years called Gaming Trend.
Yeah.
And I've only been the editor-in-chief of Tabletop for Gaming Trend for the last 5 years, but I have worked on the video game side for much of that time. And what really kind of informed me thinking about ethics in tabletop media and how we can be more proactive and you know, in light of you know, several situations that have arisen over the last few years, we had something similar happen about a decade ago on the video game side.
Really?
And so I've been seeing a lot of the same patterns. Mm-hmm. Not just in terms of ethics and like how people are creating content around tabletop games, but in terms of how the market is going and the media and how the media is maturing with it. But things went really kind of south, really bad when that happened on the video game side. And I'm kind of trying to just get proactive about it and hopefully steer us away from that. Something similar happening.
And I find that interesting because when you look at the video game industry and how it kind of was in the 90s, right, when it started exploding, very similar. Like it's almost parallel path now we're seeing obviously in the tabletop industry where there are thousands of games coming out every year. This hobby's exploded. If you've been at Origins or Gen Con or Essen, you can see that there is a massive industry around this hobby. And when you have, but it's still in its infancy stage, right? It's still young. And when you have something that young, people are trying to just figure it out, right? And often when people are trying to figure things out, you know, events and things can happen that maybe are not malicious, right? Or just misunderstandings and so forth. And sometimes they can be, right? They can have some bad players and bad apples. And so is there anything in the video gaming industry specifically that you can reflect back on that was a key moment that happened where the industry as a whole kind of had said, whoa, we got to pause here. This is serious.
Well, yeah, it was specifically about ethics in video game media. They dubbed it journalism. I think journalism is a much broader term that has you know, some baggage. People think of advocacy journalism as being all journalism, for instance, right? Whereas we're more like enthusiast media. We're really excited about games and we want to write and make videos and talk about them all the time. But it was also just about, you know, the connections that reviewers on the video game side had with publishers. There were situations like a prominent video game reviewer got fired from his position at a prominent outlet because that outlet also had an advertising agreement with the company that came out with the game that he was not kind to. for valid reasons. It was not a good game. It was, I think it was Kanan Lynch, and the individual was I can't remember his name. He went on to form Giant Bomb, which was another. It became big on its own right? But but yeah, basically, it really boiled down to our readers and watchers losing faith in the validity of the content we were creating. The word shill was thrown about quite a bit. People constantly told us that we were paid for the opinion, and it was just ugly. It was ugly, and then it got ugly in a very, I don't know if you've heard of Gamergate, but that's basically what it became.
Do tell.
Yeah. Oh God. That was basically. It was a bad time. I could waste probably an hour talking about it, and we'd both be like, "Man, I wish I had that hour back."
Well, I think it's interesting what you're saying is back then, the controversy, from what I understand, it was more around a company, relieving one of their employees because they had an opinion that went against the advertising contract they had with that client. And that was just one example, right?
That led to it.
In the tabletop industry, and we can get into a little bit deeper, I think, without naming names or companies, but certainly there's been a lot that's kind of popped up recently, and there's been some pretty major discussions that have happened in this industry where there's been accusations flying around, and regardless of what side you're on, whether some of these are misunderstandings or whatever, is still, I think, brought to the surface that it's getting a bit loose, I guess, right? And I think what the balance has to be is I think no one should ever be apologetic about trying to make a living, right? And so from that perspective. And I know some of the content creators over there that there's been some, some discussion around, say it that way. At the end of the day, that's how they're making their living, right? So you can't fault somebody for saying, I'm making a living. Of course, I'm going to ask for some sort of, I'm going to charge for services, for instance, right? And so I think getting kind of through the weeds here, right? Because you have some people jump on the fence saying, these people should just be giving these opinions and not, or I don't even want to use the word opinions, but they should be creating this content without any kind of expectation of remuneration. And I think that's not a fair stance, because I think that, people need to make a living, and, if they're putting time into something that adds value to people, then sure, that there should be value in that for them. Otherwise, they should be off working somewhere else, right? So they're putting their time into that. And I think that's fair. I think where a lot of the gray area is getting is around tactics on how some people are soliciting jobs with companies. I think that the one that we're probably thinking of, that we're not going to mention the people, was one of the first times I saw a company kind of stand up and do a timeout. Right. And go on record and say, hey, we don't like what just went down. Here's our view as to what went down, right? From our perspective. And you're going to hear from the other person's perspective. But this is what went down on our side. And we didn't like it. Right. And we felt a little bit, I know words like blackmail are thrown around, and it's probably more extortion than blackmail. But I mean, if it wasn't a misunderstanding, then that's kind of where the tonality was there. And for someone like myself reading through this, a lot of my colleagues reading through all of this, and it was like, it was all message boards, right? Obviously for like a week straight. And, a lot of people weighed in on it. And for me, I kind of looked at it from more of a surface level, saying, okay, forget the details of what's going on here between these, the content creator and the company. What I find amazing is the company decided that it was less impact on them to stand up and say, we're going to vocalize this situation. Because that doesn't really happen a lot, right? So, I mean, I'm a content creator, but I'm also I'm sorry to the listeners if it sounds like we're speaking in code, but I'm trying not to say company names and content creators because we're not here to call people out. We're here really to talk more at a higher level as to the, the environment as a whole, right?
Well, and that's the thing, right? Yeah. Like when I thought of the idea of coming up with this code, it wasn't because I wanted to wag my finger at anyone, right? Like I don't want to tell anyone how to create their content. Yeah. But we have a baseline problem of not everybody is agreeing on the same terminology. And that's where a lot of this is rooted. Like what is a review? What is a preview? And then when you add to that disclosures, like what should, if I have a relationship with the publisher, the people who gave me this game, or they're sponsoring my channel this month, like we have to have proper disclosures. Like in some countries, that is a legal requirement, right? Europe. It's a little looser in the US, but it's a legal requirement in other places. And actually, I believe the FTC just tightened the screws on that just a little bit in the last few days, which is something that's in my to read list to see how I can incorporate some of that into the code. But this is about getting a conversation. Like I think if we can police ourselves and give not only our readers and viewers a bit of trust, like we can get their trust back, but also the trust back of designers and publishers. Like there's a breakdown of trust that has happened as a result of a few isolated incidences, but they're kind of being viewed as widespread. Personally, I don't think they're as widespread as some people think. And I think a lot of people are probably already adhering to some of what I have in the code of ethics in this prototype form. But it's that perception that we have to also combat, because it affects all of us.
Yeah, and I think it's not even just the media. I think it's the publishers as well, right? And I think they need to weigh in. Absolutely. I mean, I'm a publisher, right? So I'm a content creator, obviously with the podcast, but I'm also a publisher with Tin Robot Games. And so I'm constantly kind of weighing both sides of it, right? And so where I was going with that earlier point was that what surprised me is when a manufacturer or a publisher stands up and says, "Wait a second, enough is enough. I'm taking a stand here." And that is very risky, because you can have a huge amount of blowback from something like that. Like that could went very differently for them. And that is the fear, quite frankly, of publishers, right? And you and I were talking off air just quickly about this, where, I have a list of everyone that's ever done, a review or preview of any of my games, right? And every time we do a Kickstarter campaign, we'll send out like about 50 copies, right? Out to say, hey, we're looking for people to review this. And if people want to classify theirs as a preview, that's fine too. And some people say, yeah, I'll take it and review it. And I count on the fact that probably 10% of those are not going to go in my favor. That's just the reality of board games. That's fine. But I keep a very silent list of if there's any bad players I've encountered along the way. And there's been a handful, not even a handful. There's been a few maybe. I make sure I document that very specifically, so that when I go to do that again, or if I have a colleague in the industry saying to me, hey, I'm about to send out some games to some reviewers. Do you have anybody you recommend? I say, yeah, here's who I send it to, and these are the kind of games that they look for. So just, they're going to be straight, right? So you're going to get what you get. Right. Here's three you may want to avoid because I had a real bad experience with them, and I'll never send them a game again. But as a publisher, I would never broadcast that. I would never out, so to speak, like a reviewer or a content creator, because of the fear of the blowback on your brand, right? So you kind of walk on eggshells, right, so to speak, because you want to keep everybody just kind of cool, and and hopefully and I see it very symbiotic, and I'm hoping that if anything comes out of this, is that the industry, both publishers and content creators, start seeing this as a symbiotic relationship, right? That
absolutely,
the content creators don't exist without things to do content on, and the publishers, quite frankly, need the content creators to help them get their media. You know, Seppi Yoon, we just had on the podcast recently, and he had a cool term he used. He said the media wall. Right, so he says, you know, making the game is not the hard part. The hard part is getting through the media wall, and that wall is getting a lot wider now. Right,
oh, yeah.
We're seeing dozens of people every month jumping in the game saying, "Hey, I can create content too." You know, I've got an iPhone. The iPhone before, 10 years ago, you need to have specialized equipment. Now, literally anybody with a phone can create content, and in some cases, some pretty decent content with just with a phone.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely,
the more those people are jumping into this industry, I think, the more something like your code of ethics is important, right? Because you have people who maybe are just jumping in quick, maybe don't have the history, or trying to navigate it, and having some kind of guiding principles to help them, I think, brings more integrity to the industry as a whole.
Right.
What I would love to do, if you're cool with this, is can we go through some of your code of ethics?
Absolutely.
I would
Absolutely.
love, especially for people who are listening to the podcast who maybe are not familiar with some of the terminology, but I'd love it if we could jump straight down to, and I'm showing it here on my screen for those who are watching, when we talk about paid and unpaid content, and then specifically around like previews versus reviews versus impressions versus interviews, because I think those terms get pretty muddy, quite frankly, when people are using them. And it'd be great if you can add some kind of commentary to that.
Yeah. So this is actually one of probably the most disputed and kind of talked about sections of the code so far. Mind you, I've mostly been speaking with people at Origins. I just went live with this right before Origins. And I've been kind of head down on Origins coverage for my site since then. But I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, let's talk about paid and unpaid content. And just a caveat: this is a version of the document that I have written based on feedback. I'm praying, this isn't going to work if I'm the only voice in this document. So I'm going to be, I need to get more people involved, and that's part of the reason why I'm here talking with you, James.
Sure.
But yeah, what it really boils down to, and I think I've even had some thoughts about that since this version went up, was really probably one of the most defining differences between paid and unpaid content. The consensus that I'm hearing from a lot of people is that unpaid content is fine to include your personal opinions. Obviously, the highest point of that is a review, like a critical review. But that includes peppering in a lot of kind of editorial thoughts into an impressions piece or a preview piece, right? Whereas a paid content, it needs to be fairly dispassionate, or in some people are arguing for completely dispassionate, like nothing but the facts. This is what this is. This is what it looks like. I think what I'm really kind of trying I'm coming around to is I'm not sure where this is going to land yet.
Yeah.
I feel like we have our spectrum, but what makes sense in terms of a review, and I also want to make sure that I'm not kind of stepping on anyone's attempt at having their own voice. Like you can do things differently than the way we do them at Gaming Trend and still be ethical. You just don't do them the same way we do. We take a more critical eye on with our reviews rather than an enthusiast eye.
Yeah.
Actually, are you familiar with I think it's Jason Perez. He has a channel called Shelf Stories.
No.
He recently brought up this concept of an enthusiast reviewer, and that is someone who is less critical and is more enthusiastic. I think it's a good idea, but I'm still trying to figure out where that fits into this. So there's a lot of discussion happening.
And for like an impression, so impressions are
right
consistent of opinion based on, I guess, the content on brief exposure, I guess, right? So if I was to give an example, it would be a Hunger Gamer is a good example of this.
Right.
So he does his kind of first impressions, right? And he actually labels it like that because he says, look, I played this game once, so it's tough for me to really give this a review, but I can give you my first impression. This is my impression of the game the first time I saw it. Interviews, I guess, where's the interview fall for you in terms of paid or unpaid?
So I feel like interviews are kind of a different creature, because you're either like face to face with them and it's kind of live in the moment, or you might be doing it via an email chain where you're asking questions back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I think I think it could be paid as long as it was disclosed. Because I think it's very obvious, like you're creating a very obvious kind of like back and forth.
Yeah.
And I don't see how opinions, like certainly the person you're interviewing is going to have opinions in it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like that could probably be paid content. It would probably be part of like a larger kind of campaign situation. If it was paid content, I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a market for paid interviews amongst publishers or designers. I would think they would probably be more likely unpaid than not.
Sure. And then, so in just for the audience, so a preview is almost always paid, I think. Yeah.
Actually, most of our previews, all of our previews are unpaid right now, just because that's just how we've done it for 20 years. We've toyed around with the idea at Gaming Trend of doing some kind of paid content stuff with publishers. We kind of put that on hold.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty much I've already decided, at least on the tabletop side, we're not going to do it until I have a proper V1 of this document in place, so that we can adhere to it. But previews can be paid or unpaid. I think a lot of what people are seeing, like on YouTube, are paid previews.
Or on Kickstarter pages, quite frankly, right?
Right. Especially Kickstarter pages. Actually, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, that's something that is going to get hashed out. Like I've had multiple people tell me, oh, there can't be any opinion in a paid preview. It's just, this is the game. These are what it looks like. This is the rules, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that's realistic. I think especially as an enthusiast media, as I like to call us, we're enthusiastic about things. So
yeah, it's tough not to add that commentary, right? So if I look at like Our Family Plays Games, for instance, and I've done a paid preview with them on one of my prior campaigns. I think it was Nutty Squirrels of the Oakwood Forest, and I mean, they did a great job, right? And in that preview is they usually do a good overview of the game, and their goal is to present the game kind of how the publisher is intending it, is the way I kind of look at it as previews, right? This is kind of what, so the audience can get a good overview of what this game is about. And And they do two things which I really like. One is they'll usually add in thoughts. Here's something I actually really liked. I mean, it's tough not to get giddy about something when you have it in front of you, right? But they always finish with, these are our opinions. This is something you need to decide for yourself. Go do your research and decide for yourself whether this is something that interests you or not. So they got a disclaimer at the end. And I'm seeing a lot of, We Game Together is another good example of this, where they'll at the beginning, they'll say, just a reminder, this is a paid preview. This is maybe not the final game you're going to see. They'll go through how to play the game, and it's very much on book with what, the instruction booklet was. They'll usually throw a couple thoughts in at the end of things that they thought were kind of interesting themselves, like personally, just from their own observation. But then again, they'll say, again, don't take our word for it. If this is something interests you, make sure you go and do your research. So I think if previews, my opinion is, as long as you're putting those disclaimers kind of on the front end and the back end, I think they're probably in good shape. The one for me that becomes more gray, not even for me, for a lot of people, quite frankly, is the reviews, right? Because in my opinion, a review is never paid, period.
Yes, I agree.
Right?
I agree.
So let me ask you this. So here's the caveat, right? I send a copy of a game to a reviewer to review. They didn't pay for it. They didn't buy it. I sent them a copy. So I said, would you like to review the game? They said, yes, we'll review it. I send them a copy of the game. That's technically a financial transaction, right? Because they're getting the $50 to $100 game, and once you include shipping and so forth, that they're going to have. In many cases, it's cheaper just to let them keep it than to try to pay to ship it to somewhere else. Is that a paid review? Because they've technically got something, right? And I think this is where the gray is, right?
So I actually I have a very strong opinion about that, mostly because I come from the video game side. I've got history there, and that kind of pattern has been established in that enthusiast media pretty strong. I think there's other tech enthusiast sites, that sort of thing, that also kind of have figured this out, had this figured out for a while. I think it boils down to disclosure. We have a blanket disclosure on our site that says, unless otherwise stated, the product in this review was provided for the purposes of review. And I think disclosure is important. I think it's kind of a catch-22, right? Like, a lot of us in this field don't have a lot of money. And for most of us, it's going towards video equipment, right? Lights, that sort of thing. If we didn't have access, it's you're giving us access to something so that we can then be critical of it. There will always be like that one little strand of, yes, we got something for this review, kind of. But there's also the caveat to that, at least on our site, both on the video game and tabletop side, a lot of the games that we review just aren't really something that we would want to keep, just to put it politely. Generally, when we have games that are when my writers don't want to keep the games that they've reviewed, we have a few outlets. Like, we've been working with a charity to provide a charity that provides schools with board games for educational purposes. I've got a board game club that I belong to here. Twice a year, we do a big kind of raffle, and all the money goes towards Child's Play, children's hospitals up in Denver, because I'm in Colorado Springs. So we kind of pay off some of that there. But yeah, we do keep some games, and we love getting games. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to review a game if you don't have it.
It's not the same putting on Tabletop Simulator either, right? Like, it's
right. It's not. It's not, because part of the reason why I switched to tabletop after doing years of video games is because I kind of got burned out on video games, and I wanted that tactile feeling, right? So, like, when people tell me, "Hey, you can try it out on Tabletop Simulator," I'm like, I'll see if one of my writers want to. But
yeah, it's true. I play testing. I hate play testing. I mean, I do it obviously a lot, but there's nothing like having people around a table and that human interaction and the social aspect that comes into the game, right? And it could be what the person was doing on the weekend, right? And talking, or somebody having a drink while they're telling a silly story while they're playing a game. All these are part of the experience, right? And hopefully you've got a game that kind of pulls that out of people and gets them to experience something together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where does this go from here? Like, what's the next step for this initiative? And then how do you, I mean, you can't really police it, right? So it's more, how do you get, I guess, mass adoption of these principles?
So the first thing we need to do is we need to come up with a proper version 1. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get a lot of people talking about it and a lot of people kind of contributing. And when I started I started telling people about the idea at Origins, I realized that I needed to create a place to help facilitate that conversation. Yeah. And so to that end, today, literally after I get off with you, I'm sending out to everybody that has already signed up the link, an invite to the new Discord server that I've created.
Oh, sweet.
For this purpose. And if you want to, I think I need to gate that because I kind of need it to be media and publishers and designers and basically just not quite the viewers yet, because I feel like we need to come up with something before we can come to them and say, here, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? I want their input, but we're not ready for that input yet. But I think just creating a place that we can all talk is the first step. And so that's what I'm launching today. And if you want to get on that, just go to etme.org and just hit subscribe, and you'll be part of what you'll basically be signing up to be part of the initiative and to help us figure out how to make this better and more fun for everyone.
So I'm going to spell that for people. So it's ettmi.org. I have a link in the show notes as well where people can go there and check it out. I applaud you on this. This is, it's cool to see somebody take an initiative like this, right? Like, you didn't have to do this, right? You did it because you said, there's a vacuum and I'm going to fill it, right?
God knows I've got enough on my plate already, but I can't ignore it. I gotta try to do something, right? And maybe someone else comes up with something better. I don't know. I've gotten a lot of good feedback though.
Yeah, it's been great. And I think the key is that the best way to get started is to get started, right? Someone has to take that first step, and you've taken the first step. So hopefully there's many more steps behind this one across the industry. But again, I applaud you, sir, for taking that first step. And someone had to do it, and it might as well have been you, right?
Thanks, James. I appreciate that.
No worries, my friend. Well, I want to wish you all the best this coming year. I'll be watching. I'll try to contribute as much as possible, and all the best.
And if anybody wants to talk to me about this at Gen Con, I'll be at Gen Con later at the beginning of next month as well.
Are you going to be in your booth, or are you going to be walking?
I'll be walking around, but if you join the Discord, I'll be happy to meet up.
No, perfect. All right, so Mike will be at the Gen Con. Check him out, and hopefully continue the conversation on.
Awesome. Thanks, James.
Take care, Mike. Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.